It was a crisp autumn morning in Washington, D.C., and the White House press briefing room was bustling with anticipation. Reporters from across the country were gathered, armed with their cameras and notebooks, ready to cover the latest update from the administration. As usual, Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary under President Donald Trump, was about to take the stage. But today, something felt different. There was a palpable sense of excitement in the air, something that hadn't been there before. Word had spread like wildfire that the latest press briefing would be unlike any other. There was no official statement to be released, no policy updates, just an intense buzz around one single topic. Karoline was set to address a public spat that had recently erupted between her and none other than pop superstar Taylor Swift. The feud had started weeks ago when Taylor Swift, known for her outspoken political views, had tweeted a scathing message about the Trump administration. It was not uncommon for celebrities to weigh in on politics, but Taylor Swift's tweet had caused a media firestorm. She had called out the administration for its handling of certain issues, accusing President Trump of being out of touch with the American people. It wasn't just her usual political commentary, it was a direct attack on the president and, by extension, Karoline, who had been working tirelessly to manage the administration's public image. Karoline, known for her quick wit and unflappable demeanor, had responded in kind. She didn't back down. Instead, she fired off a series of sharply worded tweets, mocking Taylor Swift's apparent need to stay relevant through political activism. The media was eating it up. The back-and-forth escalated quickly, and before long, it became one of the most talked-about public feuds in recent memory. The stakes were high, and everyone was waiting for the next move. Today, Karoline Leavitt was ready to deliver her response in front of the press. The briefing room was packed, and reporters were already jockeying for position, eagerly anticipating the showdown. Karoline stepped up to the podium, her signature confidence exuding from every step. She smiled at the gathered press, her demeanor cool but calculated. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "I'm sure you're all here for the latest updates on the administration's policies, but before we get into that, I'd like to address a matter that's been making headlines recently. I've been receiving a lot of questions about my feud with Taylor Swift, and let me be clear, I never started it. I just responded. But since this seems to be a matter of national importance, I'll take a moment to address it." The reporters leaned in, scribbling furiously in their notebooks. This was what they had been waiting for. Karoline continued, her tone sharp and precise. "Taylor Swift, for whatever reason, decided that her opinions on the Trump administration were more important than the facts. Now, I respect everyone's right to express their views. That's what makes America great. But what I won't stand for is when someone with a platform as large as hers uses it to mislead the public and fuel division." The crowd was hanging on her every word. Karoline paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in before continuing. "So, to answer your questions, no, I'm not going to engage in a petty back and forth with someone who's more interested in getting likes on Twitter than in having a meaningful dialogue. I have a job to do, and that's what I'm focused on," she said, a small but knowing smile crossing her lips. "But that doesn't mean I can't have a little fun with this." The reporters exchanged glances. There was a shift in the room. Karoline wasn't just addressing this situation, she was about to turn it into something much bigger. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, and she knew she had their full attention. Just then, the screen behind her flickered to life. The words "Karoline Leavitt destroys Taylor Swift live" flashed across the screen in bold letters. The room erupted in whispers. Karoline looked over her shoulder at the screen and laughed, a light-hearted chuckle that eased the tension in the room. "Oh, I didn't mean to spoil the surprise," she said with a wink. "But since you're all so eager to see what's next, let's get this over with." The reporters exchanged a mix of anticipation and disbelief. No one had expected Karoline to come out with such confidence, and certainly not with this kind of energy. As the briefing room settled into a hush, Karoline leaned into the microphone. "Now let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice now taking on a tone of controlled amusement. "I'm all for free speech. But when someone like Taylor Swift uses their platform to spread misinformation, I think it's time for a reality check." At this point, the energy in the room was palpable. Reporters knew this was going to be a moment to remember, but they had no idea how far Karoline was willing to take it. "Taylor," she began, addressing the pop star directly as though she were sitting across from her, "I understand that you've built a successful career through your music, but when you start venturing into politics, you're going to need more than just catchy lyrics and a catchy persona. You need facts. You need to understand what's actually happening in this country, not just tweet about whatever sounds good in the moment." The room was silent. Karoline had just thrown down the gauntlet. Let me give you some advice, Taylor, she continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Next time you want to weigh in on a political issue, maybe you should take a few minutes to read up on it first. Because right now, it's clear you're just using your celebrity status to promote your personal agenda, and frankly, it's getting old. The reporters were beside themselves. Karoline had just taken the gloves off. This was no longer just a press briefing, it had turned into a full-blown takedown. The room was absolutely still, the only sound being the occasional click of cameras as reporters snapped photos. Karoline's words were hanging in the air like an electric charge, and everyone was on the edge of their seats, waiting for what would come next. She wasn't done yet. Karoline's eyes swept across the room, making sure she had everyone's attention, and then she delivered the finishing blow. Let me also say this, she continued, her voice unwavering, if you want to be taken seriously as a political commentator, maybe you should stop using your personal drama as your platform. Because when you take shots at people, at real issues, you risk losing the very audience you think you're speaking to. Her words were sharp, but they weren't just aimed at Taylor Swift. Karoline was taking aim at the entire celebrity culture that often found itself intertwined with political discourse. It was a subtle dig at the way Hollywood had embraced activism, sometimes without fully understanding the complexities of the issues at hand. And I get it, Karoline said, leaning in closer to the mic as though confiding in the reporters. Being a pop star means having a massive platform. But being a White House press secretary? That's a different ballgame. I don't have the luxury of just making headlines to boost my numbers. I'm here to speak the truth. Taylor, maybe it's time you did the same. The reporters exchanged murmurs. It was clear they had expected something explosive, but they weren't prepared for the sheer level of sarcasm and directness Karoline was delivering. It was one thing to hear a political figure defend their administration, but it was something entirely different to see them destroy a celebrity like Taylor Swift so effortlessly without breaking a sweat. But this was far from over. Karoline had already set the tone, but the true test would be how Taylor Swift herself would respond. Just as the room seemed to be processing Karoline's comments, a breaking news alert appeared on the television screens around the room. It was a tweet from none other than Taylor Swift herself. The words flashed across the screen, "I don't need to stoop to petty insults like Karoline Leavitt does. I'll stick to using my voice for good, not to tear others down." The room exploded into a flurry of activity. Reporters were furiously typing, the buzz of excitement building as everyone tried to make sense of what had just transpired. The tweet was clearly a response to Karoline's earlier comments, but it was a bit more polished, a classic Taylor Swift move. There was no direct confrontation, just a statement designed to position her as the more mature, responsible party in the whole debacle. Karoline, however, was unfazed. She smiled wryly as she looked up at the screen, her expression betraying a hint of amusement. "Interesting," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Taylor Swift, the queen of playing the victim. It's always the same story, isn't it? When someone calls you out, you pull the 'I'm better than this' card. It's cute, really. But let's be honest, Taylor, it's just a bit too predictable." The reporters were on fire. They had been expecting a heated back and forth, but what they were getting was a masterclass in public relations. Karoline was schooling them all, her ability to stay calm, composed, and utterly ruthless in the face of a celebrity's subtle attempt to take the high road was truly something to behold. "Let me clarify something for you, Taylor," Karoline continued, her tone almost mocking now. "The whole, 'I'll stick to using my voice for good' narrative? Well, that's a nice sentiment, but it doesn't hold up when you're spreading misinformation to millions of people. If you want to be a voice for good, maybe start by understanding the issues before you open your mouth." The press room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, eager to get Karoline's take on Taylor Swift's tweet and what it meant for the ongoing feud. But Karoline was having none of it. She wasn't interested in engaging in a back and forth with the pop star any longer. She had made her point and now she was ready to move on. But as she stood there at the podium, a smirk crossing her face, she knew she had won the day. Karoline Leavitt had just taken down one of the most famous and beloved pop stars in the world, and she had done it with grace, humor, and precision. There was no question now she had the upper hand. All right, Karoline said, holding up her hands to quiet the room. "I think I've made my point. Taylor, I'll leave you to do what you do best, make music and, apparently, make a lot of headlines for all the wrong reasons. As for me, I've got work to do. Let's get back to the important stuff." With that, she turned and walked off the stage, leaving the reporters in stunned silence. The cameras continued to click, but it was clear that the press had just witnessed something extraordinary. Karoline had not only destroyed Taylor Swift on live TV, she had done so in a way that left no room for rebuttal. It was a masterstroke in political communication, and everyone in that room knew it. The aftermath of Karoline Leavitt's public takedown of Taylor Swift was nothing short of a media spectacle. In the hours following the press briefing, news outlets across the country were abuzz with the story. Some called it a political masterclass, others labeled it an over-the-top spectacle. But regardless of the labels, one thing was clear: Karoline had completely outmaneuvered Taylor Swift, and the media was eating it up. As soon as the press briefing concluded, the White House's social media accounts began posting clips of Karoline's comments. The tweet from Taylor Swift had only added fuel to the fire, and now it seemed like everyone, politicians, celebrities, and ordinary Americans, had an opinion. Social media exploded with reactions, and the hashtags #Karoline Leavitt, #Taylor Swift, and #pressbriefing were trending worldwide. In the political world, there was a sense of reverence for Karoline's performance. Conservatives and Trump supporters alike took to their platforms praising her for standing up to a Hollywood elite who they felt had lost touch with the everyday American. There was no shortage of memes, with many comparing Karoline's sharp-witted responses to legendary political figures who had taken down opponents with sheer force of will. "Karoline just made Taylor look like a schoolyard bully," one tweet read. "Swift can't even handle a real conversation, let alone the White House press secretary." Others, however, were less thrilled. Taylor Swift's diehard fans, often referred to as Swifties, were in an uproar. Many of them felt that Karoline's comments had crossed a line, and they flooded social media with passionate defenses of their idol. For them, Taylor wasn't just a pop star, she was a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope in a divided world. Swifties quickly turned Karoline's tweet storm response into a rallying cry. They began to flood the White House's social media accounts with demands for Karoline to apologize. They even started petitions calling for her removal, with some promising to organize protests outside the White House itself. But Karoline wasn't concerned. As the dust settled, she found herself laughing at the absurdity of it all. Her phone was blowing up with messages, but the only ones that really mattered were the calls from the administration, all of them congratulating her for handling the situation with such precision. "You've got a gift, Karoline," one senior advisor told her over the phone. "You turned what could have been a disaster into a win. The media's on our side now, and Taylor's only made herself look foolish." The praise was sweet, but Karoline remained focused. She knew that the political world was fleeting. Today's win was important, but there was always the next challenge just around the corner. She couldn't afford to let the media frenzy distract her from the real work at hand. But the media frenzy wasn't going to let her go that easily. The next day, Karoline was invited to appear on several major talk shows, from Fox News to The View. Her name was everywhere, and the headlines were relentless. "Karoline Leavitt destroys Taylor Swift" became the slogan of the moment. When Karoline appeared on Fox News later that week, the host wasted no time diving into the now infamous press briefing. "Karoline, that was incredible," the host said, barely containing his excitement. "You took on one of the biggest pop stars in the world, and you didn't back down. Was that calculated, or was it just instinct?" Karoline leaned forward, a small but confident smile on her face. "It was calculated, but it was also about standing up for what's right," she said. "I'm not here to play nice when people spread lies and misinformation. Taylor Swift has a platform, but so do I, and I'm not afraid to use mine." The host nodded, clearly impressed. "And the backlash from her fans? It's been intense, hasn't it?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I've gotten plenty of messages. Some supportive, some not so supportive," she said with a wink. "But it's all part of the job. You can't please everyone, and I don't intend to try." Back in the social media sphere, things were heating up. Taylor Swift's response to Karoline's remarks had been swift, pun intended. The pop star posted another message, this time aiming to steer the conversation back to her music, but her followers weren't letting the feud die. "Taylor, why are you letting this person get to you?" one tweet read. "You're better than this. Don't let someone with zero talent in politics drag you down." "Karoline Leavitt, huh? Good luck dealing with the storm you've caused." Another tweet from a Swiftie read, complete with a video of a teary-eyed Taylor singing her hit song, "Shake It Off." Taylor's fans weren't backing down, but Karoline had already made her peace with that. It was clear that the battle was far from over. The real question was whether or not Taylor would continue to engage or let the whole thing blow over. Meanwhile, the White House was continuing to press forward with its agenda, and Karoline's performance had earned her respect not just from her colleagues, but from many of her political adversaries as well. While some were still critical of her sharp rhetoric, others had to admit that she had proven herself as a force to be reckoned with. But Taylor Swift, as expected, wasn't one to back down easily. After a few more days of silence, she decided it was time to escalate the conflict once more. This time, she wasn't going to let Karoline's insults slide. Taylor Swift wasn't one to let a controversy slip by without a counterattack, especially when it involved her public image. Karoline Leavitt's comments had rattled her more than she let on, and though she had tried to brush it off initially, the pressure of the media circus had become too much to ignore. Swift's fans had rallied around her, but the attack on her character by the White House press secretary wasn't just about politics. It was personal. Taylor had always used her music and her platform to champion causes she believed in. But this was a different beast. Karoline had crossed a line, and Taylor wasn't going to let it slide. Late one evening, Taylor took to Twitter once again, this time with a message that was both pointed and poignant. Just because I'm an artist doesn't mean I'm not informed. I may not always play the political game, but I believe in truth, justice, and standing up for the voiceless. Karoline, you may be the mouthpiece of a corrupt administration, but your words don't change the reality that people are struggling in this country. Maybe you should look at the bigger picture. The tweet was a stark contrast to her earlier response. This time, Taylor wasn't just defending herself. She was taking a stand. The message was calm, but the implication was clear. She wasn't going to back down, and she wasn't going to let Karoline's insults go unanswered. The media immediately picked up on the tweet. News outlets buzzed with the story, and soon, talk shows were discussing Taylor's response. But unlike before, this time it wasn't just about the celebrity drama. Taylor's fans were fired up, and they weren't going to let Karoline's words slide without a fight. On Twitter, Taylor's followers began flooding the hashtag Taylor versus Karoline, posting memes, videos, and statements about how Karoline had misrepresented Taylor's intentions and how she had attacked a vulnerable woman. The press was abuzz again, but this time there was a shift in the tone of the coverage. While Karoline had been celebrated for her sharp retorts, Taylor's comeback was seen as a moment of grace, at least by her supporters. Karoline's critics accused her of being needlessly combative, while Taylor's supporters lauded her for taking the high road. This sparked a new round of media debates. Karoline had made her mark by tearing down a pop icon, but now it seemed the tables were beginning to turn. Karoline found herself facing the consequences of her sharp-tongued remarks. The tweets and social media posts from her own supporters began to dwindle, replaced by those of critics who claimed she had made a misstep by engaging in a feud with a beloved public figure. Even the Trump administration's allies couldn't ignore the shift in public sentiment. Some of Karoline's colleagues privately reached out, suggesting that she try to tone things down a bit, at least for the time being. Karoline was unfazed. In fact, she felt a sense of pride in having shaken the public's perception. She had taken on Taylor Swift, arguably one of the most famous women in the world, and had walked away victorious in the eyes of many. Still, she knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Taylor had struck back, and it was clear that she wasn't done. One evening, Karoline received a call from an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in a while. It was an advisor to the president, someone who had seen the way the media was starting to turn on her. Karoline, the voice on the other end, said, "I know you don't take advice easily, but you might want to lay low for a while. The backlash is getting bigger. You've got to pick your battles." But Karoline wasn't ready to back down. She had fought hard to get where she was, and now a few critical tweets weren't going to send her running. In fact, they only motivated her further. She knew that when it came to the high-stakes world of politics, being able to take a punch and deliver one in return was vital. And this wasn't just about celebrity drama, it was about the future of American politics, about standing her ground, and about representing the truth no matter the cost. "I've been in this game long enough to know that no one stays on top forever," Karoline said, her voice firm. "Taylor Swift may have her fans, but I've got mine, people who want change. People who want to see real action. I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever." Despite the growing media frenzy, Karoline maintained her focus. She knew that the attention would eventually die down, that the drama would become yesterday's news. But one thing was certain: she had proven herself as a formidable force, someone who could hold her own against even the most high-profile celebrities. And that, to her, was a victory in itself. In the meantime, the conversation around Taylor and Karoline shifted once again. What had started as a simple political clash was now a full-scale battle of narratives. Who was the real voice of the American people? Was it the celebrity who used her platform to advocate for change, or the politician who represented a divided nation? Karoline's supporters rallied behind her, seeing her as a symbol of strength, while Taylor's fans continued to defend their pop queen, positioning her as the voice of reason in an otherwise chaotic political landscape. Both sides were dug in, and it seemed like neither would concede anytime soon. The standoff between Karoline Leavitt and Taylor Swift had reached its peak. What started as an offhand remark at a press briefing had spiraled into one of the most talked-about celebrity political clashes in recent history. The public was divided, with some praising Karoline's audacity and others supporting Taylor's dignified response. But no one could ignore the media frenzy that the conflict had generated. Karoline knew that as the White House press secretary, she was expected to be more than just a political figure. She was also a representative of the administration's voice to the American people. While some pundits argued that she had gone too far, others believed she had been right to confront a celebrity who they saw as overly influential and politically biased. The situation had certainly shaken things up. As weeks passed, the press still hadn't let up. Karoline was asked to appear on several talk shows and podcasts to discuss the incident, and her responses were always direct and unapologetic. "I don't regret anything I said," she told one host during a live interview. "Taylor Swift has a platform and I have one too. When celebrities start influencing politics, we all need to take a stand." Despite this firm stance, Karoline began to feel the weight of the ongoing battle. The public scrutiny, while exhilarating at first, started to wear on her. In the mornings, she would check social media to see what new memes or criticisms were being leveled against her. It was exhausting, but it came with the territory. Meanwhile, Taylor's life continued to move forward, though her reputation had shifted in the process. Her fans remained fiercely loyal, but there were whispers in Hollywood about whether she had overplayed her hand by getting involved in such a contentious issue. Some critics began to question whether she should have kept her focus on her music rather than diving into political feuds. Nonetheless, Taylor maintained her silence after her last tweet, allowing the public to digest her words and deciding that the next move was in Karoline's hands. Then, a breakthrough moment arrived unexpectedly from the least likely source. At a press briefing, the topic of the Taylor Swift feud resurfaced again. Reporters were chomping at the bit, eager to hear Karoline's latest thoughts on the ongoing drama. The White House's communications team had prepped her for the inevitable questions, but Karoline was determined to move past the controversy and focus on the administration's priorities. When asked if she had any regrets about her comments, Karoline smiled and gave a quick, measured response. "I believe what I said was in the best interest of the American people," she started. "But the point of being in this role is not to engage in celebrity spats. We've got much bigger issues to tackle, and it's time to move forward." It was the answer many had been waiting for. Karoline's response was diplomatic, yet it carried weight. By acknowledging the situation without letting it dominate the conversation, she shifted the focus back to the issues that mattered. The press room quieted for a moment, and the reporters moved on to other questions, signaling that the media storm was, for the time being, starting to subside. Outside the press briefing room, however, the battle wasn't over. The Swifties weren't ready to let Karoline off the hook so easily. A few days later, Taylor Swift made a quiet return to social media, not with a direct response to Karoline, but with a post promoting a charity concert she was hosting. The event would raise funds for education, a cause that Taylor had long championed. In her post, she simply wrote, "Let's continue fighting for what matters." It was a subtle, almost indirect jab at Karoline's style of politics, but it was enough to send a message that Taylor was still in the game, still a force to be reckoned with. Taylor's decision to remain above the fray while continuing to advocate for causes close to her heart was seen by many as a masterstroke. It left Karoline with little to respond to, and any further attempts to escalate the battle would only make her look petty. By the end of the month, the media had moved on to other topics. The public, ever fickle, had turned their attention elsewhere, and Karoline returned to her work as the White House press secretary, now a little wiser and a lot more cautious when it came to celebrity spats. Though her stock had risen in some circles for her boldness, there were still others who viewed her as a loose cannon, someone who could easily go too far. For Karoline, the entire episode had been a learning experience. She had entered the political spotlight with guns blazing, unafraid to take on anyone who crossed her path, even a global superstar like Taylor Swift. But she realized that in the world of politics, it was better to choose your battles wisely and avoid distractions. While Taylor had gone on with her life, Karoline had earned a reputation that was as much about her style of communication as her substance. The final takeaway from this unusual battle was clear. In today's world of politics and celebrity, no one was safe from scrutiny. A White House press secretary could clash with a pop star, and the fallout could shape public discourse for weeks. But in the end, Karoline Leavitt was still standing, still wielding her powerful voice in the political sphere, while Taylor Swift continued to fill arenas and inspire millions. The battle had been fierce, but in the end, it was the American people who had the final word, choosing to focus on the issues that mattered most as the spectacle faded into the background of their everyday lives.